You remember a room that never existed. It was silent, but not peaceful. The curtains never moved, yet the light changed as if time were crawling on its belly. In the corner, a woman sat not watching you, but waiting for your collapse. She never spoke, only listened for cracks in your breath. You thought she was calm. You mistook her stillness for peace. But the walls knew better. They held the weight of her restraint like lungs holding smoke. She wasn't quiet because she was gentle. She was quiet because control demands silence. You've seen her before in a dream that ended without ending. In a conversation where her words felt scripted, calculated. You offered kindness. She offered order. You gave space. She measured it. And in the final gesture of trust, you placed your heart in her hands and watched her fingers tighten, not with love, but with possession. You never knew when it began, but you remember the feeling now. The calm was never yours. It was the silence before a decision you weren't allowed to see, a decision already made, a verdict already signed. The room is gone, but she is not. You always mistook her silence for something sacred. You thought that behind her stillness, a softness lived something you could rest against, something that would cradle your weariness like an open sky holding the stars. But silence is not always stillness, and stillness is not always peace. What you saw was not serenity. It was calculation disguised as grace. It was a soul unwilling to descend into itself, afraid that if it sat long enough in the quiet, something terrible would speak from beneath her smile. You never wondered why her eyes rarely wandered, or why her hands stayed folded too long. She didn't speak much, but not because she had nothing to say. It was because every word she released cost her control, and she preferred to keep her kingdom intact. You envied her calm, and so you softened yourself before her, thinking it was love. You called it mystery, you called it grace. But what you loved was her refusal to be undone. She would not tremble, even when your heart broke in front of her. She would not blink, even when you confessed the deepest fears you had. You thought she was strong for it. You thought strength was her quiet. But it was not strength. It was refusal. She refused the absurdity of being truly seen. And you mistook that refusal for virtue. There is a kind of woman who cannot survive in the unknown. She needs answers the way a drowning man needs a surface. She cannot love if love asks her to wait. She cannot receive if receiving feels like surrender. So she wraps her soul in rituals. She measures the words you say and checks them against the ledger of her needs. Her longing is not for union. It is for dominance disguised as closeness. She needs you near, but only on her terms. She needs you open, but only if she can remain closed. She needs to feel worshipped, but never truly risk being seen. And you, trembling with hope, mistake her coldness for depth. You want to believe she is holding something back, that beneath her restraint is a sea of affection she is too shy to reveal. But there is nothing beneath. Not because she is cruel, no. Cruelty would at least mean engagement. What sits beneath is indifference tempered into performance. She has learned how to appear calm because calmness gives her the upper hand. She has studied the stillness of saints, but not their surrender. She mimics the sacred to escape the vulnerable. You came to her with your chaos. You brought the trembling hunger of a man who wants not just a partner, but a witness. And she gave you a script, not a confession, but a role. You were to perform security. You were to embody predictability. You were to build a structure where she would not be disturbed. She needed your soul to become a wall she could decorate, not a door she had to open. You didn't notice it at first. Because men who long for meaning often confuse acceptance with assimilation. She didn't resist you, she absorbed you, and in being absorbed, you disappeared. You remember the first time she asked you to be quieter, not in volume, but in presence. She didn't say it, she never says it, but her body stiffened when you spoke too honestly. Her eyes looked past you when your fears grew too real. She didn't argue, she withdrew. And you, fearing abandonment more than truth, softened your voice. You chose tone over truth. You trimmed your confessions. You began editing yourself in real time, not because she punished you, but because she rewarded your restraint. Her approval was quiet, and so was her disapproval, but you learned to hear both. And you adjusted. You became quieter than you ever meant to be. Stillness is dangerous when it is used as a mirror, because in its presence, you begin to question your own aliveness. She sat across from you like a statue in a temple you weren't allowed to enter, and you called that reverence. But you weren't worshipping her, you were begging for permission to exist. You asked her questions, she answered with questions. You opened your wounds, she examined them like a scholar, not a lover. And the more you revealed, the more you disappeared. She saw everything, but nothing pierced her. Her calm was not intimacy, it was insulation. You believed she would meet you in the silence. You believed that if you waited, if you proved your stability, she would finally open. But she never did, because opening would mean dissolving the mask. And she needs the mask. She needs the silence to remain untouched. Because the moment she enters it, she will be forced to see that her control was never calm. It was fear in drag, fear of chaos, fear of being touched in a place she cannot define, fear that if she feels too much, she will break, and she would rather command than crumble. You, in your longing, gave her too much room. You made yourself small in the name of peace. But peace was never her aim. She wanted order, and you were a variable. You were a heartbeat she couldn't predict, so she placed conditions on your presence. She loved you when you were still. She loved you when you were silent. She loved you when your truth did not interrupt the smooth arc of her plans. She loved you as long as your soul did not demand witness. But the soul cannot live in rehearsal, and so yours began to decay, slowly, quietly, like bread left in a sealed box. You began to doubt your instincts. You questioned your sadness. You blamed your longing on immaturity. You thought if I were stronger, I wouldn't need so much. If I were wiser, I wouldn't feel so empty. But you were not weak. You were simply unwelcome. Not your body, not your image, but your essence. She didn't reject you. She erased you politely, slowly, without ever saying a word. And this is the paradox: the more silent you became, the louder her calm seemed. It filled the room like perfume, masking the rot beneath. It wasn't serenity, it was suppression, but she wore it like grace. And you, starved for something holy, called it love. You held her hand at night, and it felt like holding marble, beautiful, cold, indifferent. Now you wonder why you stayed, why you kept pouring yourself into a vessel that never overflowed. And the answer is simple. You did not fall in love with her. You fell in love with what you thought she might become if you just waited long enough. You were not with a woman. You were with a possibility, a projection, a sculpture of intimacy carved from your own loneliness. And what did she fear? Truly not you, not your love, but the silence within her that could no longer be tamed if she let you all the way in. She feared what might rise if she stopped controlling, if she stopped orchestrating the image. She feared becoming real, because realness is unpredictable. Realness cannot be managed. And so, she chose control. And she called it calm, But calm without contact is not peace, it is exile, and she exiled you in the name of harmony. She locked the door from inside the silence and smiled through the keyhole. You began to think she was kind, not because she offered warmth, but because she never struck. She listened, she nodded, she made tea while your voice trembled, and that felt like mercy. But her kindness was not devotion, it was diplomacy, a form of control that moves like silk and binds like iron. She never argued, never raised her voice, never contradicted outright. But she redefined the battlefield. She did not fight you, she absorbed you. She replaced confrontation with composure, and that was how she conquered. You mistook her softness for surrender, but she never surrendered. She orchestrated tenderness the way a ruler orchestrates a feast, not to share, but to keep you seated, obedient, lulled. You noticed it later, after your mind had already folded into her image, after your heart had already written oaths in her name. There were rituals, unspoken laws, the way her mood dictated the atmosphere, the way her silence twisted into gravity, pulling your guilt toward the floor. She never said you failed. She only stepped slightly away, withdrew slightly more, until you volunteered to correct yourself. You assumed the distance was your fault. You sought closeness, and she offered reward, but only if you bent the right way. This wasn't love. This was training. She called it patience. She called it understanding. But she understood only one thing: how to maintain the upper hand without appearing to hold it. You gave, she received. You confessed, she nodded. You wept, she wiped it clean with a glance. And in all of it, she remained untouched. She played the saint. She dressed her silence in compassion. She let you collapse into her arms, not to hold you, but to keep you kneeling. And still, you believed, because your need ran deeper than your suspicion. You were not in love with her kindness. You were in love with the illusion that you were finally safe, finally seen. She gave just enough attention to keep you hungry, just enough affection to make absence feel like punishment. You worked for closeness. You tailored your truth. You studied her expressions like sacred texts, hoping to be deemed worthy again. You thought, this must be love, the hard kind, the holy kind, the kind that demands sacrifice. But it wasn't sacrifice. It was compliance. Her power was not loud. It moved beneath your skin like cold air in an empty room. She never accused. She only made you feel accused. She never ordered. She only made obedience feel like virtue. And so, you obeyed. You stopped laughing too loudly. You edited your anger into silence. You asked permission for your sadness. Not directly, but in tone, in caution, in the way your body began to shrink in her presence. You were not being loved, you were being ruled. But the throne was hidden beneath lace. There is a kind of cruelty that wears velvet gloves. It doesn't cut, it wraps, it doesn't command. It invites, but the invitation is conditional. She made you feel like you chose her, like you found her. But she positioned herself precisely to be found by the kind of man who would break himself just to stay. She never built love with you. She built a throne and crowned you only when you knelt. You wanted to believe she was tender, and in moments, she was. She could touch your face with fingers that felt like absolution. She could say your name in a way that disarmed every wall. But tenderness, in her hands, was not vulnerability. It was leverage. Her softness emerged only when she needed to reset the balance to bring you closer just before you drifted too far. She never reached for you unless you began to see too clearly. Her affection was not given. It was deployed, and so you stayed, because the glimpses of warmth became proof of something more. You waited for the day her calm would melt, for the moment she would descend into realness, into grief, into chaos. You waited for the scream beneath the silence. You waited for her mask to fall, but the mask never fell. It adapted. She does not scream. She does not cry. She does not confess. She survives through poise. She endures by appearing harmless. And in her harmlessness, she takes everything. You thought you were the protector. You believed your strength would comfort her, but strength was never what she needed. She needed a witness she could manage, a devotion she could direct. You were not chosen for your courage. You were chosen for your hunger. She could sense the man who seeks salvation, and she knows how to offer it in fragments, just enough to keep him returning, just enough to keep him silent. You think you pursued her, but she made herself the object of pursuit. Precisely so, she would never have to chase. She never risked anything. Not her truth, not her sorrow, not even her desire. All risk was yours. You spoke first, you broke first, you asked first, and every time you reached out, she calculated whether to receive or retreat. She doesn't fall in love. She selects proximity. And when it suits her, she offers grace. But grace is not love. Grace does not tremble. You recall moments when she gazed at you as if you were all that mattered, but look closer. Those moments arrived when she felt you slipping, when your spirit, tired of bending, began to rise. And in that moment, she gave you softness, not because she felt it, but because she sensed its power. It was not love, it was governance. And you, mistaking it for a miracle, bowed again. Ask yourself, what did you become in her presence? Did you grow braver, wilder, truer, or did you become manageable, predictable? Did you not learn to speak only the words that pleased her rhythm, to withhold the heat of your being for fear of disturbing her quiet? And yet, you called it love, because she never yelled, because she never struck. But love does not require violence to destroy. It can starve, it can silence, it can wear the face of peace and still swallow a soul whole. She does not believe in mutual dissent, in the mutual undoing that love demands. She believes in elegance, in orchestration, in maintaining the illusion of safety while never giving herself over. And so, she plays the role. She touches your face. She leans in when the moment is perfect. But the timing is not intimacy. It is choreography. And every movement is meant to remind you she is the constant. You are the storm she permits. You think, perhaps I was too much, but you were never too much. You were just unmanageable. You wanted something real. She wanted something precise. You sought revelation. She sought symmetry. You burned. She balanced. And when you finally ask yourself why you feel so alone beside her, the answer is simple. You have never met her. Only the mask. Only the echo of what she allows. She is not calm. She is a kingdom that cannot afford collapse. And so she rules through softness. She binds through stillness. And when she smiles, you feel seen, but only the part of you she allows to live. You kneeled because you believed it was noble, because somewhere, in the quiet ache of your longing, you mistook surrender for love. You thought devotion could melt the cold. You imagined that if you just bent low enough, gave enough, stayed soft long enough, she would see you, not the performance, not the reliability, but the soul behind the gesture. You believed she would choose you once you had proven yourself unthreatening, but love does not bloom in safety. It demands danger, it demands truth, it demands exposure, and the man who kneels too long is not loved. He is pitied, or worse, he is forgotten. There is a kind of woman who needs to be needed more than she needs to be known. She will praise your stability, but secretly resent it. She will say she wants a man who listens and then find your silence weak. She will ask for your heart, but only to hold it in a glass case, never to touch it, never to let it beat freely in the wild of its own rhythm. You gave her worship, and she gave you distance, because to be worshipped is to stand above, and she never intended to come down. You bowed not because she asked, but because you hoped your sacrifice would be seen, that the weight of your reverence would stir something soft in her. But it did not. Reverence is a mirror. She saw herself, not you, and you, in your ache, vanished beneath your own offering. That is the sickness of kneeling. The more sincerely you bend, the more invisible you become. You gave her power not in form, not in name, but in silence. You offered your fire, and she repurposed it as light for her stage. You stopped being a man. You became the pedestal. Do you remember when you stopped asking to be held? Not because you no longer wanted it, but because you learned her arms were a contract. Every embrace came with a clause. Do not cry too much. Do not need too long. Do not rage, even when you are broken. Her calm was not a sanctuary. It was a test. You were loved on probation, measured daily, rewarded in fragments, praised when quiet, tolerated when trembling. And still, you called it love, because you were taught that love is what remains after you erase yourself for the sake of another. But she never wanted your truth. She wanted your posture. She wanted to be the still center around which you orbited. She wanted to feel necessary but not penetrated. You loved her and called it faith, but it was ritual, repeated gestures of loyalty, hoping for grace. And every time she leaned in with that look of gentle approval, you mistook it for connection. But it wasn't. It was confirmation that you were still playing your part, that you still believed this was love, that you hadn't yet seen through the veil. You began to shrink, not suddenly, but subtly. First in your voice, choosing your words more carefully, then in your expression, dimming your joy when hers didn't match it, then in your anger, swallowing it, fearing it would break the balance, and finally, in your presence becoming quiet even when your soul screamed for thunder. You became smaller, hoping she would love you more clearly. But she does not love the silent man. She only controls him. She cannot see you if you disappear for her sake. And yet, you stayed, because love, in its illusion, feels holier than loneliness in its truth. You told yourself stories. She is trying. She is wounded. She just needs time. But no, she needs control, not as violence, not as tyranny, but as reassurance. Your unpredictability frightened her. Your depth challenged her image. She needed stillness, not connection. She needed reflection, not encounter. And you were too alive to be manageable, so she trained you. And you let her, because to be trained felt better than being alone. But inside you, something began to rot. A man cannot kneel forever without his spine remembering it was made to rise. You began to feel disgusted with your gentleness. Not because gentleness is weakness, but because yours was no longer free. It was manufactured, traded. It was the product of conditioning. And the more you gave, the more she withheld. Because in this ritual, love is not shared. It is dispensed in droplets, like medicine, measured to maintain dependency. You began to test her, small acts of defiance, a sharp word, a silence you did not explain, a truth spoken without softening. And each time, her mask cracked slightly, not in anger, but in withdrawal. She pulled away, subtly. As always, no accusations, just the cold, the kind that creeps in when the fire is slowly dying. You felt punished, but no sentence was read. You felt abandoned, but no door was slammed. That is her art to vanish without leaving. You are not the man she wanted. She wanted a ghost who smiled, a statue that kissed, a presence without a demand. You, with your ache, your hunger, your need for the divine through another you were too human. She dressed you in expectations and called it intimacy. But intimacy without exposure is control. And the one who never descends cannot meet you in the depths. You gave her everything but the one thing she feared, your true self untamed, unedited, unashamed. She cannot love what she cannot direct. And so, when you finally stood, when you finally said no, when you refused to apologize for your fire, she did not fight for you. She did not beg. She did not grieve. She simply adjusted the performance. She let you leave, or made it easy for you to go. Because her love was never about you. It was about the image. And when the image cracked, the frame was discarded. And you, still aching, still hoping, asked yourself, was it ever real? And that is the question that wounds the deepest. Not because the answer is no, but because the answer is silence. No closure, no clarity, only absence where presence once mimed love. And that absence echoes louder than her voice ever did. You were never loved, not because you lacked worth, but because you refused, too long, to demand that your worth be met. You thought love could be earned. But love is not a reward. It is a meeting, and she never met you. Only your submission, only your shape bent around her comfort. The man who kneels forever becomes scenery, a quiet adornment in someone else's kingdom. And now you rise, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the quiet grief of a soul that finally remembers it was never meant to worship a mask. There is a door she never opened, not because it was locked, but because it was real. Behind it, the noise she silenced, the chaos she denied, the man who did not bend. You were never that man until now. And now, the room she kept immaculate begins to decay, not from malice, from memory. She will remember your voice, not for its gentleness, but for the one time it did not ask permission. And in her silence, there will be no peace, only the quiet flicker of a candle she thought would never burn. You will not return, but your absence will haunt her more honestly than your love ever did. The kneeling has ended. Let her throne rot. Let the silence echo. Let the mask slip. She ruled nothing, and she never touched your soul.